Hi guys, welcome to Flowcast, a podcast by Flowout where we chat with successful entrepreneurs, freelancers, and other amazing professionals that are crushing it in their game. We are Flo and Peter, and we'll be your host on this audio journey. In this week's episode, we'll talk with Jordan Walker, co-founder of SoFriendly, Yak, and Backtrack. We'll get to know Jordan, who is going to share the experience he gained through his previous business ventures. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
All right, like Flo said in the introduction, today we are here with one and only Jordan Walker. Jordan is a co-founder of SoFriendly, Yak, and Backtrack. From creating engaging experience designed to drive growth for the world-leading brands, to raising 10 million to build an audio-first messaging platform to help you enrich async communication. Jordan, welcome to our podcast.
I appreciate it, guys. Yeah, I'm so excited to be here, excited to talk and see what we get into.
All right, cool. Thank you for coming again. And to kick it off, let me first ask you, how would your family and friends describe you? What Jordan like?
Oh man, wow, what a good question. I think a lot of them actually would describe me as pretty quiet and introverted. You know, in my kind of day-to-day life, I tend to just be pretty reserved. I don't really go out a whole lot. I don't do a bunch of crazy things. But yeah, I think they describe me as kind of a quiet, reserved, kind of thoughtful person who kind of cares a lot about, them. I care a lot about my friends and family. So I think that's the best way I would sum it up.
That's quite a pattern. Like every person we have here in the podcast says that family will describe themselves as a quiet. So really interesting.
Yeah, it's funny because like growing up, like I think I've always been naturally introverted, but like being an entrepreneur and a founder, you kind of have to learn this kind of like extroverted face, if you will. So like I enjoy it, right? Like I enjoy seeing people and hanging out. But after a certain while, my battery just completely drains. And I'm like, all right, I need to just chill in my room and hang out for a little bit, do my own thing. But yeah, I think it's maybe just a common thing some of those types of people have.
Yeah, I totally feel you. I'm the same. As soon as I go out, I'm really extroverted, but as soon as I get home, I just want to be in my room, quiet, doing work on computer.
Yep. I can totally relate to that.
All right. And what do you think your unique skill is that has helped you to get to the point where you are today?
Yeah, so it's funny. I always joke that I'm only good at like one thing, but I think my superpower is I understand people really well. So just like being able to meet people where they're at, and I give all that credit to my parents for the way they raised me, kind of the things that I was exposed to, as a child and growing up and whatnot. But the way that I'm able to kind of like interact with people and meet them where they're at, I think is really, really unique. And something that I bring to the table that I don't think a lot of people can bring to the table, like I'm able to.
All right. And can you expand this a little bit? Like, how did this like influence your background? Like, what school did you go to? Like, what career choices did you make before like becoming an entrepreneur?
Yeah, well, so I went to a small school here in Florida called University of North Florida. Nobody's ever heard of it, but go Ospreys. It's an exciting school. Florida, definitely on the come up. And actually, since I graduated, I have always been an entrepreneur. So I had never had like a traditional corporate job, if you will. But I think kind of like with my upbringing and kind of like that, draw to like helping people, learning about people, et cetera. I've always had that throughout my entire life. And so, between just meeting a bunch of people, talking to a bunch of people, that really kind of like helped form my thoughts and opinions of the world. And really, I think led me to kind of go one day, or, say to myself one day, hey, I want to be a founder. I want to start something really, really special. And really when you're starting the business, like that's what it takes, right? Like that network can be everything for you, or just, trying to build that community can be everything for you and really make or break the difference for you. Because as you guys know, starting something up new is very, very difficult, and you need kind of that support group behind you, not just in terms of people who are actually working on the business. The people are just going to bring you up when you're not present in a room, or people who are going to introduce you to the right people who are just going to support you, tell you that you can do it, and kind of give you that confidence. And so, without that, would I be here today? I don't know if I can say that for certain, but was really, really kind of helpful and impactful on my journey.
All right. So building a community is the key to success. Cool. Yeah, go ahead. What do you want to say?
I was just gonna say, yeah, like I think so. Like I think just building that group of people who can really rally around yourself and what you're doing is just really important, because as you guys know too, the ups and downs of building a startup can be so extreme. The highs are great and the lows can be super, super low. And so just like having that, community, that transparency, that honesty, just kind of like that genuine nature with them can really, really help out.
Yeah, definitely. You are based in Orlando, Florida, right? Like when we listen to like different entrepreneurs, we always hear like Silicon Valley, New York, all those like metropolitan cities, but not so much about Florida. But recently I read about that Orlando has all the ingredients to be the next big startup hub. Like, what is it like to work there?
Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, shout out to Dom from TechCrunch. She just did a really awesome piece on, Orlando and kind of these less popular cities in Florida. But yeah, what's cool about it, and I think what's so unique about us, is that we have been remote and working in cities that weren't traditionally cool before remote work was cool, right? So again, I mentioned we went to a small school in Jacksonville, Florida that nobody's ever heard of. And, our first company, and Hunter and I, we got our start there. Then we were working out of Orlando, after that. So like we've just gone from like one kind of unknown city to one unknown city. And before, the way to get in was really, really hard, right? Like you were saying, you got to be out in the valley, you have to be into, in New York, and really kind of all these traditional tech hubs. And we were able to just kind of like fight tooth and nail and push through the noise and show people, hey, you can build a really awesome company from, anywhere in the world, including cities like Orlando. So being in Florida in general, I think is really, really awesome for a lot of reasons. I mean, the weather's great here. There's a lot of really awesome talent. And what's really interesting about it too, is that folks are looking to Florida and really kind of like discovering Florida in a sense, in terms of kind of the entrepreneurs and talent here. People are going, oh, wait, wow, what's actually happening in Florida? Like, that's really interesting. There's people there building great companies that we didn't know about otherwise. So yeah, I'm super bullish on the state as a whole, and then particularly, Orlando and Jacksonville. They're great cities. They're awesome.
Yeah, I think that's definitely relatable for us being from Slovenia, another underrated location. So yeah, I want to dive deep into your work. You're the owner of SoFriendly, a design and development company that built Yak, Helium Leaf, Newton Mail, and others. What made you start building off your own ideas instead of helping others people build theirs?
Yeah. So I got brought on to SoFriendly in 2014, like right at the conception of the company. And so what's funny about SoFriendly is that the reason that we kind of built those other products is they actually served as marketing vehicles for us. And so we sucked at marketing in the traditional sense of like, hey, let's go be strategic about how we do X, Y, and Z. But what we're good at is like building product and kind of like winning on the internet. And mind you too, before Yak, I mean, we had no network whatsoever. We've been fortunate to meet a lot of people now and get funding. But before this, we had literally zero connections, and we don't come from a background that like even put us in a position to kind of get some of those connections. So we had to really fight for literally everything that we had. But to answer the question, we would build those products as marketing vehicles. So the idea with that would be someone would find them and they go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Who built this product? And then they would find, SoFriendly, and that would generate kind of like referral business. And so that's what those products served as. And Yak was the one that just ended up being really different from the rest. And, we ended up pursuing that full time.
Oh yeah, I see strategy definitely worked out. And, I'm really interested. It's always interesting to listen to founders talk about their products. So can you tell our audience what Yak actually is?
Yeah, so Yak is an asynchronous messaging platform, which sounds really intimidating when you kind of hear it at a high level. But essentially what it does, it helps people kind of replace, meetings or calls or conversations that otherwise would have been meetings with just a simple voice message or a screen share. So you can imagine a scenario, you guys are over in Slovenia, you said, so we're both on way different time zones. Imagine if we were trying to collaborate normally day to day and have meetings, it would be really hard or impossible throughout the day. And so instead, I would just record a Yak. So I would record my voice or a screen share. I would record it. It would go to its own unique link. So it'd be like yak.com/whatever. I would send that off to you, and then you're able to consume that on your own time. So it's like we're having a meeting, except on each of our own terms, without that kind of like lag or that delay of trying to schedule a meeting and the overhead of trying to figure out what's going on between the two.
How did you come up with the idea? Was it to solve your own problem or something else?
Yeah, actually it was. So Yak was initially built out of solving our own problem. So on the agency side, we've always been remote and we've had people all over the globe, and we ran into that same problem. It's 1 a.m. for somebody, but the other person's just getting their day started. Someone's going to have to stay up really late or get up really early, and there was no kind of grade in between. And so that's really how Yak came about. Yeah.
I'm sure people that are building their own similar or different products are very interested in how you scaled it. How many people are working on Yak right now?
Yeah, so right this second, our team's actually really small, and we've always stayed pretty small. There's 5 of us working on the company, or at the company today, between Yak and Backtrack, which we can get into later. But yeah, we're small but mighty, so we've got a great group of people.
Perfect. And to take a look back when you were starting off, how did you get the traction or the initial interest from the users?
Yeah, so Product Hunt was actually a really great vehicle for us early on. We had done the Product Hunt Makers Festival, their very first one, in November of 2018, I want to say. You may have to fact check me on that. I think it was 2018. And that kind of brought in like a lot of really great initial traffic for us, and that was really special gift. Obviously, we've been trying to build up kind of in the Product Hunt community forever, but again, we didn't, like I said before, we had 0 connections. So anything we could get, we could take. And when we launched it for the Makers Festival, as a lot of people actually kind of said, hey, this is really interesting, or I have a similar problem, and that's when people started to rally behind it. And so after we kind of built it out more, we did the whole wait list thing, and then we actually launched it on Product Hunt again, did like an official launch. And that was a really big acquisition strategy for us. And then, the things that sprinkled in between, like talking about it on Twitter, DMing people, doing whatever you got to do. But Product Hunt was really the main vehicle for us to kind of get some of that early interest in Yak.
Yeah, very interesting insight, and very glad that Product Hunt worked out for you.
Yeah.
To zoom out a bit, do you think async is the future?
Yeah, I think async by default will be the future. So I think there's a world in which, I think meetings are going to have a comeback. We have actually learned from a few people as well that a lot of people actually enjoy meetings, right? Because they get to connect with their teammates. That's when they get to hear other people's voices, etc. I think async will become kind of the default, right? Like I don't need to be on a call 24/7 with everybody working. Sometimes I need that focus time to be heads down and talk, or and focus and do what I got to do and write this document and finish this task and finish that task. But I think still we'll see sprinkled in companies who have meetings here and there just to make sure that they're on the same page. Like even us internally, we have all hands weekly that are just really good for everybody to kind of get on the same page, talk to one another, and make sure the needle's moving in the right direction.
All right, I see you practice what you preach. Does your whole team work in async way?
Yeah, we dog food, and we live and breathe everything that we talk about. So yeah, async by default. We're a completely remote company still. Yeah, and what's really cool about that too is like when you dog food, kind of your own product or practice what you preach, as you said, it really gives you insight as to like what you actually need to be thinking about in terms of the product and the overall the business, right? It's like, oh, well, if we're doing this, odds are maybe somebody else is, or, hey, maybe, this team is kind of trying to make the transition. How do we kind of help them make that transition? So it ended up becoming a real superpower.
All right, I want to deep dive a bit in raising the money. This is such an important topic in the world of startups. You basically raised 10 million in funding from GGV Capital, Slack, Active Capital, Arlen Hamilton, and others. What was your journey like from the raising your seed to your last Series A?
Yeah, it was really interesting because, like I mentioned again a couple of times now, we had no connections before this. So like raising money seemed like this crazy thing that only people in Silicon Valley do, and it was an impossible task, and it seemed really, really difficult at the time, like really difficult. And fundraising is very, very difficult. And this again too, this was pre-pandemic, when we raised some of our initial funding. And so it especially was hard raising capital in a city that nobody knew. I remember some of the early investor calls that we did. People were like, you guys are based out of where? Or like, you're from where? You're doing what? And it's like, so that was interesting. But yeah, I mean, it certainly was tough. We contacted as many people as we could. We got really organized. We got really focused and said, hey, here's kind of our fundraising strategy. Where we did really win, and what I think a lot of people have not emulated today, is we took kind of a different approach to our fundraising strategy, in that we realized very quickly, okay, the odds are stacked against us, right? We're an unknown entity to start with. We're also from Florida, where nobody knows where we're from. So like we had really two things going for us. And it was really hard for people to meet us, because this was right around the time COVID was becoming a thing. So like it wasn't officially a thing yet, but nobody was really traveling. And so we couldn't go in person to meet people. And so with that, we said, okay, we're gonna stand out, we're gonna differentiate ourselves. And so what we did is we would DM a bunch of people. But instead of immediately just saying like, here's Yak, or, check out our business, we just open up with like a normal conversation. Hey, see, you're interested in this. Hey, this looks exciting. Hey, let's talk about this. Or like, wow, I really like this thing. And we wouldn't bring up Yak at all until it just kind of organically or naturally came up. Because the thing that I think a lot of people forget is VCs are humans too, right? Like they're just as much people like you and I are. And so, if you think about it, if someone were to approach you asking for something, you wouldn't want to feel like you're being like sold to or pitched to, or whatever the thing might be. You'd be like, that gives me like a weird feeling. You would just want someone to approach you like a normal person, just like a friend. And so we deployed that strategy, I think pretty successfully. It ended up working well for us, and then we ended up raising a seed round late December of 2019. And yeah, that's kind of the advice that I would give even to a lot of people now. It's like, just focus on building genuine connections, and the rest will kind of figure itself out later.
Yeah, definitely raising money can be really overwhelming, especially for up and coming startups without any connections. I mean, connections are crucial even for like well-established businesses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they really are everything, whether it's investment, partnerships, sales, whatever the thing might be. Yeah, just having those people that you can ask for a favor, really lean on, is so important. So important.
Yeah, you gave a pretty good advice about how to go about looking for investment, but like, what advice would you give for the first-time startup founders when they're looking for a first investment? Like what stuff should they be cautious when like talking with VC funds and and similar?
Yeah, a couple things. So one is, I would think about like, what type of leverage do you have in this situation? Again, everybody's situation is so subjective. So I would think about that and get really honest about that. Like, okay, what terms and what deal are we kind of like willing to accept? What's our upper bound and what's our lower bound? So I would think about that. I would also think about, for your fundraising strategy, what is it that you're going to focus on? Like, what's your superpower that you're going to focus on to build your fundraising strategy around? If you're, a sales veteran and sales is your thing, then like absolutely, maybe focus on that. If you're a crazy growth marketer and you know how to go get, 100,000 people in the platform tomorrow, then maybe you kind of go focus on that. If it's product or technical expertise or something really unique, maybe you go focus on that. So I guess the thing there is like, focus on like whatever your superpower is, and build like a kind of a story and strategy around that. And then the third thing is, I'd say really just get organized. I think that's what a lot of people, kind of maybe miss out, is that like fundraising seems like this super glamorous, awesome thing that's really, kind of high up in the sky. But I think if you really can focus in, get organized, figure out, who you're going to talk to, when you need to do follow-ups, who would be a good fit, to partner with, who would not be a good fit to partner with, making sure that your data room is all kind of organized and in place. That's really going to kind of set you apart and really kind of help out. And then also just be really realistic about like, what you're going to use the capital for and how much capital you need.
All right. And once you do all these, what you just talked about, like, what's the best strategy to get in touch with investors? Should be like just cold emailing, going to like seminars, conferences?
For us, I mean, I these days I think it's, again, super subjective, but for us, what worked really well is actually Twitter DMs. Twitter DMs, okay. I talk about all day long. It's been magical for us between investment, sales, partnerships. Twitter DMs is where all of the magic happens. But yeah, funny enough, a lot of our seed round investors actually came from Twitter DMs. I think I can't even remember how many were there, but majority of our seed round investors came from Twitter DMs, and that was just a cold Twitter DM. So yeah.
All right, for aspiring entrepreneurs listening, go make a Twitter account right now.
I was going to say that advice I can say for sure. If you're a founder trying to build your business, you have to be on Twitter. It's non-negotiable these days.
Nice. And how important was the pitch deck for getting an investment for you? Did you use it?
How important was the what?
The pitch deck.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the deck was actually everything for us. So I could talk about this all day long. So we actually ended up raising a Series A last year, and our deck was actually really so good that Business Insider actually got in contact with us. They're like, hey, can we do a story on it? Can we open source it so other people can kind of use this as a point of reference? And we're like, yeah, absolutely. Because again, our whole thesis is like, we went through this, like, again, fighting tooth and nail for opportunity. We know what it's like to like kind of be looked over, whatever the thing might be. So we really feel strongly about like helping other founders as well. But to answer the question, yeah, I mean, the deck is everything. The deck is a first impression and kind of a extension of, yourself, your characteristics, your values, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's really, really important, right? Like if I'm an investor and I see that the deck is just very sloppily put together, maybe about the founder, I can infer, well, maybe they're a sloppy person, maybe they're a lazy person. It's like little details like that really, really matter in the business. And then of course, you also want to make sure that it's cohesive, it makes sense, and tells like a story in a sense, like really show somebody, hey, here's what we're building, it's really special and what's going on.
Yeah, and looking back now that you went through this whole process, is there anything you would do differently?
Is there anything that we would do differently? So I'm gonna give two answers. So like my immediate answer is like no, because if I said yeah, like what we did got us to this position, so I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, true.
What maybe like we could have done better is we could have gotten organized much sooner. So again, we ended up getting organized, which is great, but we could have been organized much, much sooner. And then I wish this is something else we also knew, just like it's more like a mentality thing going in. And it makes so much sense when you say it out loud, but just be prepared to get a lot of no's. And when you say it out loud again, you're inherently going to get more no's than yeses, because if you have 100 conversations, you're not going to take investment from 100 people. That would just be insane. But just kind of like mentally knowing that like it's not personal, the no's are going to be part of the game, and you just got to keep pushing and keep fighting and get through it.
For sure, good mindset tip. You recently invited people to take a look at Backtrack. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so Backtrack, man, I'm so pumped to talk about it. And so in our users' own words, it's a time machine, and I'm not making that up. And so what Backtrack lets you do, it lets you record conversations, whether it's in person, like IRL, or online from the past. And so imagine, we're all sitting in a room together. We have a really awesome brainstorming session, and we're going, oh man, that wasn't recorded, or we're like, oh, what did so-and-so say? Oh, with Backtrack, we can actually go in the past, get that conversation, and then now have it, as a point of reference that we can, go take action on. Yeah, and we're really excited about it. There's, so many great use cases that can come out of this thing. Sales, client conversations, brainstorming sessions, whatever the thing might be. It's a really, really special product. We're so excited for it.
What are some challenges of building such products? Some legal issues about recording, or what's the process so far?
Yeah, and I think that more has to do with just kind of some of the messaging on our end, right? Because like releasing Backtrack is still so early, and we just need to kind of update the website. But yeah, I think there's some challenges around like, or some questions around, hey, how do you guys think about privacy, or what's that kind of look like? And what we tell people is like, your backtracks are your backtracks, unless you decide to share them out. But like if I were to record a backtrack, that's completely unique to private to me. If you were able to record a backtrack, or if you were to record a backtrack, that would be completely unique and private to you. And so that's what we assure people. And I think we just need to do more messaging around that. But I think it's one of the challenges, but we're going to overcome it for sure.
Do you have a pitch for Backtrack ready if we were the investors? What would be
Well,
your
so
pitch?
we're not gonna, we're not gonna raise investment for like Backtrack, to be clear, is a Yak product. You know, think about like Apple iPhone and Apple to MacBook, etc. So Backtrack's gonna be that for us. So right now we're focused on building the wait list, and then we're gonna actually be opening up our beta here in the next few weeks, actually. And so we're just getting ready to onboard people and really get it going.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about that. So what happens to Yak now with Backtrack? Is just elevates it?
Yeah, Yak's gonna still, you know, be around and be a thing. Like I mentioned, again, I'll use kind of like the Apple to iPhone example. It's like Apple releasing, you know, an iPhone, a Mac, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's, you know, we're gonna have the kind of the same approach there.
Yeah, so basically Yak is all about eliminating live meetings, and Backtrack will be a support tool that records the meeting that already happened, right?
Exactly. Yep. So in the cases where you do have to have a live meeting, right? And especially when it comes to in person, right? We're seeing a lot of people go back to the office and hordes really at this point. There's no way to capture those really special moments in person. And so a tool like Backtrack really, really needs to exist. But to answer your question, yeah, you nailed it completely.
All right. And yeah, you said you're not raising money, but imagine I'm a company looking for such a tool or something similar. How would you like pitch it to me? Like how would you convince me to use Backtrack?
Yeah, well, first I would ask kind of you know, around your meeting habits or how you know, what your communication habits are. If you're never in meetings or you're never in conversations with people, maybe your role doesn't require it. Say, okay, well, you're probably not a good fit. And I think, just real quick, I think that's something that actually a lot of founders miss too, is that like when you're building, like you want to find like the right people. Like you don't want to just like, you know, kind of spray and pray, if you will, and go for the masses. You want to invite the right people in your product, people that are excited about what you're doing, who have the problem, and who really like, wow, this would solve like a massive kind of pain point for me. So that's one side of it. But I would first ask kind of about like your meeting habits, what these conversations are, and then I would dig in on what these conversations actually are. So are they, you know, just random conversations? Are they really mission critical conversations? You know, are they being recorded currently? Are they not being recorded currently? How do you know, get kind of this quick information? And I'd ask some of these questions in a way, and so that you actually kind of arrive to the answer yourself, and you go, oh wow, yeah, it would be really useful to kind of go backwards and capture some of these conversations, and be able to kind of create these little clips.
Yeah, we've heard you've been doing a bunch of user testing for Backtrack, and this always seems like a challenge to do it the right way. How did you approach it?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I think the most important thing is finding the right people, right? You don't want to have someone, you know, testing who's maybe just feeling whatever about the product, isn't excited, and is not willing to invest the time and energy. And like when you say it out loud, it makes so much sense. But like finding the right people is just as important as making sure the product's really, really special. But the other thing, you know, to answer the question as well, is how do you think about it? Is being very, very systematic, scientific, and organized, right? Testing, measuring, making changes, testing, measuring, making changes, and kind of repeating that process as we go along. And that's not even really just for like testing or like building product. That's just the nature of the business in general. When we think about like marketing or potential outreach strategies, sales strategies, whatever the thing might be, just being really scientific about how you go about it is something really, really great that I think a lot of people really need to internalize.
Yeah, I love that strategy to focus on the yeses, basically.
Yeah.
And how do you incorporate these insights into full-fledged product features?
What do you mean in terms of the strategy?
In terms of the feedback that users give you, what's then the process to get this insight incorporated in the product?
Yeah, so one thing that we actually follow very closely is Rahul from Superhuman, his product market fit engine survey. I recommend everybody go check out his YouTube video kind of on it, but it's a really great way to think about like what feedback you actually listen to and what you don't listen to. Basically, the general idea is look for the people who would be very disappointed if they could no longer use your product, see what their feedback is, and kind of like rank that feedback based on how frequent that feedback is kind of coming up, and really dig into like what the actual problem is. You know, maybe the actual problem isn't just adding another feature, but maybe it's something just not clear, or you need to better job of onboarding, whatever the thing might be. So I would say, I guess, like how we implement it, or I think about it is like, be be scientific. Listen to your very disappointed, your users who would be very disappointed without your product, and then focus on what their feedback is, and then kind of score it based on the frequency and what the actual problem is.
And do you already use Backtrack inside your team? And
yes, and it's amazing.
Yeah, how do you right now, do you use Yak and Backtrack simultaneously?
Yeah, we use both. So if so what's cool about Yak too, like with these links, is that you can actually create links and put them and share them out externally, right? It's not just within, your team on Yak. So if somebody has a question for me of like, hey, can you give me feedback on, like the other day, I'll give an example. I was talking to this guy on LinkedIn. He said, hey, can you give me some feedback on my deck? And I said, sure. I said, what would actually be more resourceful instead of hopping on a live call is I will record a screen share on Yak. And now you can go have this feedback forever. So you can go back and like reference it as you make changes. You work on it a little bit, take a break, come back with fresh eyes, et cetera, et cetera. And so you can kind of have this like documentation of this point of reference. So yeah, to answer the question, I use both.
Okay, gotcha. And is there anything like, I don't know if that's the right question, but you fear about like, what are some things that you're really excited about, and maybe what you fear about like scaling Backtrack?
Well, what I'm really excited about is, with the small group of people who have it now, is that it's solving just an insanely massive problem the people who are saying that they would be very disappointed without this product is just substantial. And there's a lot of value created. I won't dive into any sort of real details here, but a lot of value being created by it, which is really, really incredible. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for that value to be given out to more people as well, right? And they get to experience these like really magical moments of like, oh, like that moment was so critical. I'm glad Backtrack was there to able and get it for me, and then take it, wherever it needs to go. As far as, challenges for scaling, I don't think it's necessarily a sole problem to Backtrack, but just kind of like, how do you stay organized as you scale? How do you think about like customer support, prioritization, et cetera? I think that's really with any product in any company. But again, I think it all just comes down to being organized and having a plan up front and sticking to that as best you can.
Yeah, definitely organization is the key. And now that you're building like simultaneously Yak and Backtrack, it's kind of like you said, iPhone of Apple. How did you go about creating a marketing strategy?
How do we go about the marketing strategy for Backtrack? Well, to be honest, I think that's what we're still trying to figure out. Twitter I've mentioned a few times now, has always been a great channel for us. So between Twitter and just like LinkedIn, that's really been the marketing so far. We got some secrets up our sleeves that we'll pour more gas onto it later. But yeah, just social channels for right now.
All right, sweet. And what's the ultimate goal for Backtrack, like long-term vision?
Yeah, so the long-term vision for the company, or for the product Backtrack, is we want to make conversations as searchable as Slack or email, right? Again, I referenced the problem of in-person conversations not being recorded or not being documented at all. And sometimes there's really special moments that would be so cool to revisit. One example that I'll give is when we got our first ever call for investment. Mind you, again, I'll create the context. We're super young at the time. We've never talked to an investor before. We didn't know anything about fundraising or investing, and this investor calls us. And I remember after the call itself was very cool and very special, but after the fact, we're like, oh my gosh, like we just talked to an investor, man. Like this is so crazy. Like the energy, it was just like a really special moment. And unfortunately, we're never going to be able to get that back because it just wasn't recorded. There's no way to capture an in-person conversation. And so, the long-term vision is like make our in-person conversations searchable as Slack or email. Imagine if we had backtracked in that moment, and now what, 3 years later or however long it's been, we're able to go revisit that very first, kind of celebration moment after the investor call. That would be the coolest thing in the entire world. So yeah, make conversations it's easily searchable as Slack and email.
Yeah, gotcha. Like, to be honest with you, before the podcast episode, I wasn't quite sure what the value proposition is of Backtrack, but yeah, now I think you're building something really great. Like now, how you said,
really special. in our own users' words, they're calling it a time machine. So I can say we are building a time machine. So it's very cool.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, so now we talk about Backtrack and Yak, but what about the future for you? Like, what are you looking forward to the most?
Wow, what am I looking forward to the most? I mean, generally, I like to be involved in things that I think are going to be high impact for, the local community around me, but then also like kind of like the world. And so, whether that's being able to, provide an opportunity for the next person to come up and do their thing. Maybe it's just like taking a phone call with somebody, doing whatever the thing might be. But just in general, I think what's next for me and always will be next for me is like, how can I create opportunities and value for other people in a way that maybe I didn't had when we were kind of going on our entrepreneurship journey, right? Like, again, it was really hard for us. We had to fight very, very hard. And, before we ever raised money for Yak, there was just years of just like trying stuff before then. Like it really, people talk about overnight success. For us, between raising money and when we first started our entrepreneurship journey, I think it was like 5 or 6 years. So like there had been a while kind of in between there. It wasn't like we just woke up and this thing kind of happened. And so that's, I think, what really means a lot to me is like, how do I create these opportunities for other people and set them up for success and work on things that are going to be really, really high impact to the world.
Yeah, you already provided us with so much great advice, from talking to the investors to the mindset of building a product. And I wanted to ask you, do you remember what's the best advice you ever heard from someone?
The best advice I've ever heard. Man, it's hard to pick like what the best is because it's relative to situations, but there's 2 things that I'll say. The first one is from my parents, and it's, again, I talk a lot about people, but it's take the time to like get to know somebody or like and really invest in a person, right? You just never know what they have to offer. You never know, what their journey is, their background, what they're going to be doing in the future. So just like take the time to like, actually get to know someone, like learn like a detail, just really like sit down and like invest with them and be very genuine about it. And that's, I think, the best, like one of the best pieces of advice is. The other piece of advice that I would say is really important is there's actually 2. So one, and they go hand in hand. One, I got from one of our investors, is say it out loud. And saying the concept of like saying things out loud makes them feel more real, whether it's good news or bad news. And in both situations, you have to go do something with that news, right? And saying it out loud makes it feel like, oh, wow, like I really need to go, take this thing on. Whether it's bad, even if it's bad news, you got to say it out loud. You got to look it in the eyes and go, okay, I got to go fix this thing. And I'm far from a perfect person. I've had my fair share of things I need to, go do. And saying it out loud, that concept of like saying it out loud, talking to yourself, whatever, is really helpful because it helps you kind of like push through. And then I think the other thing too, kind of like with that, it's just like being really honest with yourself, right? So it's like saying it out loud is kind of like one of the first steps, but then kind of like, maybe sub point B or whatever you want to call it, is just being really honest with yourself, like around like the state of just like things in general. Like when something's not working, don't be like, oh, we're gonna try this thing, or this like it's not working. We need to go like change something, whether it's like a marketing strategy, sales strategy, product strategy, whatever the thing might be. Just don't be so prideful. Don't be so have so much of an ego that you're like, no, we're not gonna, be really honest about it. Be really honest about like the state of things, and go do what you got to do with that information.
Yeah, such valuable tips, and another good use of Backtrack. So whenever you hear a good advice, you can just save it for later.
That's right. That actually is one use case that kind of came up with like content creators. Is like while they're doing their panels or whatever, you can just backtrack kind of the gems that they give. So funny segue there, but yeah.
Yeah, today you gave us so much insight, like really valuable stuff. And to finish it off, I want to ask you like 5 burst questions.
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Your favorite book?
My favorite book. Man, there's a couple. That'd be hard to pick. What is my favorite book? There's this book called, actually, my favorite book right now is actually 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. I really enjoy that book. Recommend everybody reads it.
And favorite podcast?
The All In podcast, for sure. Those guys, Sachs, Chamath, Friedberg, and Jason, they kill it every week. It's so good.
All right. You emphasize so much on productivity and like organization. Like, what's your favorite productivity tool?
My favorite productivity tool. Well, obviously ours would be number one. But behind that, I would say these days I'm liking Notion a lot. At first I didn't like it, but my co-founder Hunter, he swears by it. He's like, dude, just like, do this, try it. It's probably Notion these days. It's great.
Yeah, Notion is huge on Twitter. Like a lot of people writing about it.
Yeah.
It's most used app on the phone?
The most used app on the phone, probably email.
All right. And you go to hobby?
Playing sports. Like I love being outside, playing sports, doing whatever I can, just kind of outdoors.
All right. Any sport particular?
I'm a really big basketball guy. In college, I ran track and field, so I also enjoy some of those events, but really all of them. I like doing stuff, so whatever I can get my hands on, but basketball is my number one.
All right, nice. Do you know Luka Doncic?
I do, yes.
Yeah, Slovenia represent.
Yeah, he's amazing. He's a really special talent.
All right, cool. Yeah, thank you, Jordan, for everything. It was really nice talking to you. You gave us so much insights, and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I mean, this was so much fun. Thanks for having me on. I'm excited for the future of the podcast, and I appreciate this so much.